the time the pain is generated by the brain. So whether you have an ankle injury or whether you have a hamstring tear or whether you just have pain in the neck, it's what the brain perceives as a threat will manifest itself into pain. So if you think of an acute injury, which can it can technically be divided into two different parts. An acute injury, if you go over your ankle, you know the exact time when that happened. I went over my ankle, it was very painful, I wasn't able to walk. That's what we classify as an acute injury. A chronic injury is something a little bit different. It may start from an acute injury, like you injure your back when you lift up something off the ground, but it keeps on persisting and goes on. It's not bad enough to actually go see somebody about, but it's not good enough for you to function fully at 100%. So what happens with a lot of people is they tend to adapt into this, and they tend to develop, especially when it goes down to low back pain, they start to develop a fear and an anxiety and start to have these adaptive movement strategies where you move that little bit differently. And this could be something as simple as putting your hand on your knee as you go down to bend up or to pick something off the ground. A lot of people might be very, very confident in doing that, but then people that have a little low back pain, they'll bend down, they'll put their hand on their knee, and that's what we classify as a different movement pattern. So it ends up being in a bit of a vicious cycle. You're afraid of your back because what you've learned from a lot of GPs or from things you might have heard from friends. Oh, he injured his back, it never recovered from him, and now he always has a bad back, or he has a weak core. So all of these things kind of feed into this vicious cycle of trying to protect the back and making people worried and anxious that, oh, it's never going to be right. So the brain has a large part to play in it. Pain is kind of sent through nerve signals up to the brain, and the brain decides, right, is this dangerous, is it not dangerous? And that's how it decides whether it's going to give you pain or not. So it makes a decision based on all the information of what's around you. So there was an example of soldiers that were in war where they actually ended up breaking their leg and having compound fractures, but didn't feel any pain. So if you put that into context of what your brain is seeing, number one, you're in the middle of a battlefield. What's more dangerous, you breaking your leg and not being able to move, or you staying in the same position and realizing that you could end up getting shot? So the brain is a powerful part to play in it. And it also reverts back to different injuries as well. So if you've had previously injured your back, and then you've never injured your back before, and then all this information that you would have heard before of people not being able to move after you injured your back makes that pain 10 times worse, because your brain's thinking, oh, this is bad, I've never experienced it before, but my learning history has actually taught me that this is going to be fairly bad. And that's when it kind of leads into a lot about the emotional injury. So it can be triggered by, if you have any emotional trauma, and they've done studies on this, in the past, that can also manifest itself in pain. Now, I'll touch on that a little bit later on. Sorry, well, there's the slide, so it's actually quicker than I thought. So, as I said before, it creates the same pain as physical injuries. Now, when it comes down to children, it might not manifest itself as well as in pain. It can come in as something as simple as stomach cramps or headaches or not sleeping, because they don't understand what the danger is. If you take a young child, for example, that walks out in front of a car, they see the car, but they don't recognize the car as danger. If we walked out in front of a car and the car was coming towards us, we'd jump, our heart would beat, we get a rush of adrenaline, and then you walk out, you walk away from it, hopefully, and you then begin to calm down, you then start to get your breath, and you hyperventilate. And that's your body recognizing a danger, which is the car, giving you a shot of adrenaline to get out of the way, and then eventually, once you go out of the way, you calm down. There is, in the older adults, the emotional trauma can manifest itself in something a little bit different. It comes into kind of like irritable bowel syndrome or headaches or low back pain are one of the key factors that have currently been studied, but they're also looking into different areas as well. So the direct link between emotional trauma and childhood and chronic pain always manifests itself in later life. So let's look at the stressors of the nervous system. So as I said before, like learning history of previous physical injury, emotional injury, getting very, very anxious about this injury, and the being fear of this might not come right. There's so much information out there, like in Dr. Google, that you could Google one injury and then get a whole lot of information that you don't fully understand, but you'll end up, a lot of people can come away from that actually being worse and trying to protect themselves a little bit differently. So the brain remembers this previous trauma and manifests itself in certain stressful scenarios. Now, an example that we use for this is, let's say John is walking through the bush in Australia, and next thing he feels this little nip on the side of his leg. continues to walk on, thinks everything's fine, and 20 minutes later he's lying on the ground in burning, searing pain because he's after being bitten by a snake. Now, let's say 2 years later, John is walking through the same scenario. He's in the bush in the middle of Australia. He gets a little nip on the back of his leg, but straight away he's jumped on the ground in so much pain, and he thinks, that's it, I'm done. I'm after getting bitten by a snake. I'm not going to be able to come away from this. This is the end. Now, if John looks down on his leg and sees this little tiny thorn just sitting in the side of his leg, so what his brain perceived as being a snake bite, because it's happened 2 years before that, their brain kind of goes, right, we felt this, we're in the same area, this is obviously a snake bite, I have to give him a higher level of pain to let him know that something is wrong. But in fact, it's actually just very similar, but the scenarios is a little bit different. So your brain is kind of playing tricks on you just because of what you perceive as a dangerous threat around you. There's also other ways, different ways like pain can manifest itself, and I see this an awful lot in the clinics. Stress is one of the biggest problems that people come into me, especially with neck and shoulder